The sliding doors opened. A man walked in, worn leather jacket, dark jeans, scuffed boots that had clearly seen better roads. He pulled a small basket from the stack near the entrance and moved toward the produce section without looking up. Nobody recognized him. Nobody looked twice. He was just another customer on a slow Tuesday afternoon at Cornerstone Market. Location number 9, Southeast Denver, Colorado. Except he wasn't, and what he was about to see over the next 2 hours would set something in motion that nobody inside that store was prepared for. Not the manager, not the shift supervisor, not the woman at Register 4 who was trying very hard not to cry. Stay with us, because the part that changes everything doesn't come until the end, and you will not want to have missed it. Cornerstone Market had been a fixture in southeast Denver for 11 years, 19 locations across Colorado and New Mexico. A regional chain that had built its reputation on the idea that a grocery store could be something more than a transaction. The founder, a man named Walter Briggs, had opened the first location in a strip mall off Alameda Avenue with 40 employees and handwritten mission statement taped to the back office wall. We are here to serve our people first, then our customers, then our numbers. For 7 years it had worked. Walter had expanded carefully. He had insisted on promoting from within. He had made it a point to know, by name, every store manager across the chain. He had believed, genuinely and without performance, that the way you treated the people who worked for you was the direct and only cause of the way those people treated customers. And then Walter had gotten sick. It wasn't dramatic. It was the slow, ordinary kind of sick that takes a long time and costs a great deal, and leaves a person with less bandwidth for the things that once seemed obvious. He had pulled back from day-to-day operations. He had trusted the regional structure he had built. He had checked the numbers. The numbers looked fine. But the numbers were not the whole picture. Keanu Reeves had invested quietly in Cornerstone Market 4 years ago. Not a large stake, not a headline-generating partnership, just the kind of private investment that it's C-suite that certain people make when they believe in what a company is trying to do and want to give it room to do it without making the investment about themselves. Walter had called him 6 days ago, not about the investment, not about money. Walter had called because he had received an email from an anonymous address. The subject line read, "Something is wrong at Store 9. I don't know who else to tell." The email was 3 paragraphs long. It described a supervisor who had been using the scheduling system to punish employees, cutting hours when people missed shifts for legitimate reasons, rewarding the people who said nothing and stayed compliant, turning the most basic management tool, the schedule, into a mechanism of control. Walter had forwarded the email to his regional director. The regional director had investigated 2 days, spoke with the store manager, reviewed the numbers, filed a report that said the store was performing within acceptable parameters and that staff complaints, where they existed, appeared to stem from a small number of underperforming employees looking to deflect accountability. Walter had read the report, and he had not believed it, because Walter Briggs had spent 30 years in this business, and he knew that the specific combination of declining customer satisfaction scores alongside a store that was technically hitting its margin targets almost always meant one thing. Someone was squeezing the people to make the numbers look good, and the people were the part that didn't show up in the report. He called Keanu, not because Keanu was an investor, because Keanu was someone Walter trusted to walk into a room and see what was actually there. Not what was being performed for someone from corporate, not the cleaned-up version that appeared when a regional director visited. What was actually there on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when nobody was watching. Keanu had said yes. He always said yes to Walter. He pulled a basket and walked toward the produce section. The first thing he noticed was the quiet. Not comfortable quiet. Not the quiet of a well-run store where things are humming along and nobody needs to make noise because everything is working. This was the other kind. The quiet of people who have learned that staying small is safer than being noticed. The produce section was underattended. A few items on the wrong shelf. A bin of oranges that was nearly empty with no restock in sight. A hand-lettered sale sign that had come partially unattached from its clip and was hanging at an angle. Keanu straightened the sign without thinking about it. He moved toward the main aisle. 2 employees were restocking canned goods, about 20 feet apart. Neither spoke to the other. Neither looked up when a customer walked past. They moved with the mechanical precision of people who have reduced their work to the minimum required movements and are conserving everything else for the simple effort of getting through the day. He turned toward the registers. 4 checkout lanes open, 3 in the standard lanes, 1 at the express. At register 4, a woman was scanning groceries. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. Dark hair pulled back tight. Her uniform was pressed and clean. Her name tag said Diane. She was trying to smile at the customer in front of her. Keanu could see, from where he stood, that it was costing her something. Her eyes were red at the edges. Not dramatically, not the kind of red that announces itself. The quiet kind. The kind that happens when you have been holding something very carefully for a long time and your body is starting to register the effort even when your face is still working hard at normal. She scanned the last item, said the total, processed the card, said thank you, said have a good afternoon. The customer left. Diane exhaled, just slightly, just a fraction. And in that fraction, Keanu saw everything. He moved toward the canned goods aisle. He was not in a hurry. He selected a few items without much purpose. A can of soup, a box of crackers. He was buying time and sightlines, and the store was giving him both. From the canned goods aisle, he could see the whole front of the store. He watched Diane work 2 more customers. Both times the smile came up. Both times it cost her. He watched the 2 restocking employees. One of them, a young man in his mid-20s, caught his own cartwheel on a pallet edge and stumbled. Nobody asked if he was okay. He righted himself, looked around briefly, and went back to stocking shelves with his head down. The way people look when they have learned that drawing attention to yourself, even accidentally, is something to be managed carefully. Keanu moved toward the back of the store. There was a brief service counter near the deli section. Nobody was behind it. A customer had been waiting for about 2 minutes when Keanu passed. He watched the customer wait. He watched nobody come. The customer eventually walked away without the service they had come for. Turned toward the dairy section. A woman in her 40s was struggling to reach a tag on a high shelf, her arm extended, her breathing slightly labored. Nobody came to help. She managed eventually and moved on. But the small, private adjustment of her expression afterward, the slight compression of the lips, the brief closing of the eyes, That was the expression of someone who had expected nothing and confirmed what they expected. Keanu had been in the store for 22 minutes, and he already understood in the bones of it what was wrong. This was not a store that was underperforming. This was a team that had stopped believing. There is a difference. The numbers might look similar from the outside, but the internal reality is completely different. A store that is underperforming can be coached. New systems, new training, new expectations. A team that has stopped believing cannot be fixed with a memo. You have to go deeper than that. You have to find out what took the belief away. He heard it before he saw it. A voice, male, carrying the particular edge of someone who is accustomed to using volume as authority. It came from the direction of the registers. Keanu turned. A man was standing on the floor side of the registers, not behind the counter. Standing in the customer space, which was itself a statement about who he thought the rules applied to. He was broad-shouldered, maybe 50, in a dark vest with the word supervisor in block letters across the back. His name tag said Brett. He had a clipboard under one arm and the expression of someone who had decided years ago that his job was to find problems, and that finding problems was the same thing as solving them. He was talking to Diane. Keanu stopped where he was. Brett's voice was not shouting. It was controlled, aimed. The kind of voice that is more unsettling than shouting precisely because it is controlled. You could hear every word. Third time this week you've had a slow lane. 3 times. I've got the data right here. He tapped the clipboard. If you can't move the line, I need to put someone else at 4. Diane stood very still. The last customer had a return, she said, quietly, steadily. The steadiness of practice. It took a few extra minutes to process. That's what you said last Thursday. Last Thursday I also had a return. Brett shifted the clipboard. Look, I need to see different numbers. If I don't see different numbers by the end of the week, we're having a different conversation about your schedule. He paused. You already lost 8 hours last month. You might want to think about how important those remaining hours are to you. He walked away. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't want one. The message was the entirety of the interaction. The response would have complicated it. Diane stood at register 4 for a moment. A new customer approached with a cart. She looked up. She smiled. She started scanning. Keanu stood in the dairy aisle for a long moment. He had seen enough people in enough situations to know the difference between a manager who was strict and a manager who was using the levers of employment, hours, schedule, evaluation, as instruments of control. Brett was the second kind. The conversation at register 4 was not about Diane's lane speed. It was about reminding her that he had power over her time and her income, and that he was not afraid to use it. He moved toward the snack aisle. He was there for another 20 minutes, watching the floor. He saw Brett twice more. Once speaking to the young man who had stumbled on the pallet, a conversation that lasted 45 seconds, and the young man with his head lower than before. Once standing near the service counter, doing nothing visible, except being present in a way that made 2 nearby employees move differently, faster, more mechanically, less themselves. After Brett disappeared into the back office, the air in the store changed by a small but measurable amount. People's shoulders came down slightly. The pace of movement shifted from managed to natural. Keanu noted that. He went to the register, not register 4. He didn't want to make Diane's shift harder. He paid. He carried his basket to his car. He sat for a moment. Then he called Walter. "She's been there 6 years," Walter said. His voice was low. He'd had the call for 30 seconds and already knew where this was going. "Diane Calloway, one of the original hires at Location 9. I remember her from the opening. She's holding that front floor together," Keanu said. "I watched her for close to an hour. She is working at full capacity inside a system that is actively working against her." The supervisor, Brett Harmon. He's been at Location 9 for 14 months. He's using the scheduling system as leverage. He said it directly. "I heard it. He told her she'd already lost 8 hours and she should think about how important her remaining hours were." Walter was quiet. The regional director's report said the staff issues were coming from underperforming employees, Keanu said. "I know what it said. I don't think that's what's happening." "No," Walter said. "Neither do I want to go back." "You don't have to do that." "I know," Keanu said. "I want to." Walter said he would ask his compliance team to begin a quiet review of the scheduling records for Location 9. All modifications, all reductions, every internal note attached to any employee file. He would do it without alerting Brett or the store manager, who's a man named Phil Carson, whose relationship to the situation was not yet fully clear. Keanu said he would go back tomorrow. Walter said, "Be careful." Keanu said he was always careful. He drove back to his hotel. He sat at the small desk near the window and wrote down everything he had seen. In order, in specific detail, the produce section, the 2 restocking employees and their careful, self-contained movements, the customer waiting at the service counter with nobody coming, the woman struggling with the shelf tag, Brett at register 4, the 45-second conversation with the young man, the way the store's air changed when Brett went to the back office. He filled 4 pages. He read through them once. He went to sleep. He came back the next morning. Same jacket, same jeans, same boots. He arrived at 9:15. Just after the morning rush had passed and before the midday crowd built. He went directly to the hot coffee bar near the bakery section, bought a cup and moved toward the central aisle. The morning shift had a different texture than the afternoon, a different set of employees, but the same atmosphere, the same careful smallness, the same calculated quietness. He found a position near the household goods section, where he had a long sight line to most of the store floor and the front registers. He stood and appeared to examine dish soap for a duration that would have seemed unusual to anyone paying attention, but nobody was paying attention to him. That was, in itself, its own kind of information about the store. He watched for 40 minutes. Brett came in at 9:53. Different vest, same clipboard, same walk. The walk of someone who owns the space they move through, not because they have earned it, but because they have decided it. Keanu watched him move through the store. Brett stopped at the service counter. A young woman was setting up the morning stock, paper bags, receipt rolls, small maintenance items. Her name tag said Angela. She was in her late 20s, efficient, focused. Brett said something Keanu couldn't hear at this distance. Angela stopped what she was doing. She looked at Brett. She replied. Brett replied. Angela's postures had changed, just slightly. Specific change of someone absorbing something they don't want to absorb in a public space where they cannot react the way they might prefer to react. Brett moved on. Keanu watched Angela watch him go. Then she picked back up where she had left off. Methodical, precise, reduced. Around 10:30, Keanu moved to the produce section to pick up a few items he would actually take home. He was reaching for a bag of apples when footsteps stopped near him and a voice say, very quietly, "You were here yesterday." He turned. A young man, 24, maybe 25. Brown hair, slightly overgrown. A uniform that was clean but had been washed many times. A name tag that said Jesse. "I was," Keanu said. Jesse looked at him, not suspicious. More the careful look of someone who is calculating whether something is worth the risk of saying. "You straightened the sale sign in produce," Jesse said. "Yesterday afternoon. It was crooked, yeah." A pause. Jesse looked toward the front of the store, then back. Nobody from this store would have done that. Keanu held his basket with both hands. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 3 years. How's it been?" Jesse was quiet for a moment, choosing. "It was different before Brett came," he said. "I'm not trying to complain. It was different." "Different how?" Jesse glanced around again. The produce section was empty except for them. "People talk more," he said, "to each other. To customers. Phil, the store manager. He used to come out on the floor in the mornings, walk around. Not to check on anything, just to be there." Jesse adjusted a bag of potatoes on the shelf without being asked. "Habit. Brett came in 14 months ago. Within about 6 weeks, Phil basically stopped coming out. I think he stopped." "What do you think?" Keanu said. Jesse looked at him directly. "I think Phil is scared of Brett too." Keanu was quiet. "Diane," Keanu said, "at register 4. Jesse's expression changed. Something protective came into it. "Diane's been here since this store opened," he said. "She knows every regular customer by name. She could run this whole front end by herself if she had to." He paused. "Brett has cut her hours 3 times in the last 4 months. She used to have 38 guaranteed hours. She's down to 22. Keanu did the math without saying it out loud. 22 hours. At the wage this store would be paying a 6-year employee. He thought about what 22 hours meant for rent in Denver, for utilities, for everything that doesn't pause when your employer decides your schedule is no longer a priority. "Why?" Keanu said. Jesse's jaw tightened briefly. "She asked for a schedule accommodation," he said. "A few months ago, her mother had a stroke. She needed to adjust her shift window so she could handle her mother's morning care before coming in. She put in the request through the proper form. Brett denied it. She came in late twice in the first week while she was sorting out alternative coverage. Brett wrote her up both times. Jesse stopped. After the second write-up, her hours started dropping." He looked at Keanu. "She never complained. Not officially. She just kept coming in, kept working, kept being the best person on this floor." His voice was even, not angry exactly. The way a person sounds when they have been angry for a long time and the anger has settled into something quieter and more permanent. "And Brett keeps cutting her hours because he can." Keanu held his basket. "Is there anyone else?" he said. "Other people he's done this to." Jesse looked at the floor for a moment. "Angela at the service counter," he said. "He cut her weekend hours after she asked to attend college courses on Saturday mornings. She's working toward a business degree. She's been doing it for 4 years. A pause. "And Raymond in the back. He's been here 8 years. He hurt his shoulder 6 weeks ago. Doctor's note, modified duties. Brett filed him as a performance concern instead of a medical accommodation. Raymond's been scared to use any sick days since because he doesn't know what gets written about him when he does." Keanu nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." he said. Jesse. Jesse looked at him. Who are you? He said, not unkind, just the direct question of someone who has decided the conversation has earned it. Keanu looked at him. Someone who came in to look, he said, because someone who cares about this store asked me to, and I'm going to make sure he hears what I just heard. Jesse studied him for another moment, then went back to straightening the potato shelf. Keanu paid for his apples and left. He called Walter from the parking lot. He told him about Jesse, about Diane's hours being cut from 38 to 22 after she requested a schedule accommodation for her mother's post-stroke care, about Angela's weekend hours was being pulled after she asked to protect her Saturday college coursework, about Raymond's shoulder injury being filed as a performance concern. Walter was very quiet through all of it. When Keanu finished, Walter said, "The compliance review came back this morning. Partial results. Tell me, in the past 14 months, Brett Harmon has modified scheduling records for 11 employees at location 9. Every modification resulted in a reduction. The average reduction is 14 hours per week across those 11 employees. 7 of the 11 had some form of accommodation request, medical note, or schedule adjustment request filed in the 90 days prior to their reduction." Keanu leaned against the hood of his car. "That's not a pattern," he said. "That's a system." "Yes," Walter said. "And Phil Carson. Phil hasn't flagged a single one of those reductions. Not one. Either he doesn't know or he knows and has decided it's easier not to. Jesse thinks Phil is scared of Brett." Walter was quiet for a moment. "That's consistent with what I'm seeing in the internal communications. Phil's approval rate on Brett's schedule modifications is 100%. He signs off on everything. No questions in the record. What does Brett's personnel file look like? That's the other thing." Walter's voice was careful now. The voice of someone arriving at the part of the story that is worse than what came before. Brett's store performance metrics for location 9 are strong. Revenue is up 8% year over year. Shrinkage is down. Labor costs are significantly below target. Keanu understood immediately. Of course they were. You cut the hours of your most experienced, longest-serving employees. You replace their hours with new hires who earn less. You keep the floor staffed at the minimum viable level. Revenue stays roughly steady because the customer experience hasn't visibly collapsed. Yet, it's just quietly degrading. Shift by shift, week by week, in ways that won't show up in the numbers for another quarter or two. And the labor line looks beautiful. And if you are a region director reviewing that store, you see a supervisor who is delivering results. You do not see Diane at register 4, trying not to cry. You do not see Jesse carefully calculating the risk of each sentence before he says it. You do not see Raymond working through shoulder pain because he is afraid of what gets written in his file if he uses a sick day. "Walter," Keanu said, "you need to come here." "I know. Not through the regional structure. Directly. You and your HR director and your employment compliance attorney. You need to come in person, and you need to talk to Diane and Jesse and Angela and Raymond before Brett knows you're coming." "I'm already booked on the first flight tomorrow morning," Walter said. "I want you there." "I'll be there," Keanu said. That evening, Keanu drove back to the store one more time. He didn't go in. He parked in the lot and watched through the glass front of the building as the late shift wound down. He could see the registers from where he sat. He could see Diane at register 4, Still working, still scanning, still saying thank you. He thought about his mother, about the specific quality of exhaustion that is not tiredness, but something deeper. The option of holding yourself together inside a system that does not see you as a full person, that treats your needs as inconveniences and your emergencies as performance failures. That gives you just enough hours to depend on and holds those hours over you like a question that never gets answered. His mother had known that exhaustion. He had watched it in her when he was young. The way she came home from certain shifts and sat at the kitchen for a few minutes before she could do anything else. Not resting, just resetting. Finding the part of herself that was still intact after hours of being managed by someone who didn't particularly care whether she was intact. He had remembered that. He had remembered every time in his career he had been in a position to choose how he treated the people around him. Every time he could advocate for someone who couldn't easily advocate for themselves. He watched Diane close out her register at the end of her shift. She did it carefully, methodically, with the competence of someone who has done it hundreds of times and takes the responsibility of it seriously, even when the day has been long and the system has been unkind. She counted the drawer twice. She did not need to count it twice. She counted it twice because she is the kind of person who does not leave something half done when she has the energy to do it fully. She took off her name tag, put it in her apron pocket. She looked around the store once. The brief, practiced survey of someone making sure everything is as it should be before she hands it off. Not because anyone asked her to, because that is who she is. Then she walked toward the employee exit. Keanu watched her go. He thought about the 8 words Brett had said to her that afternoon. You already lost 8 hours last month. You might want to think about how important those remaining hours are to you. 8 words that contained inside them a complete architecture of control. A reminder of dependency. A threat calibrated precisely to land on the specific fear of someone who needed those hours to pay for something real. He thought about the fact that Brett had said them without apparent effort. The ease of someone for whom that kind of leverage has become routine, something practiced, something he had stopped thinking of as a choice. He thought about the fact that nobody on the floor had intervened. Not because nobody cared. He had seen in Jesse's carefully managed neutrality, studied invisibility of the employees nearby, that people cared. But caring and acting are very different things when the person with the power to reduce your hours is watching you decide which one to do. He sat in his car in the parking lot of a Denver grocery store on a Wednesday evening and felt the specific clarifying weight of knowing that tomorrow something was going to change. Not because he had power. He didn't have power. Not the kind that signs paychecks or modifies schedules or writes anyone's performance review. But he knew someone who did, and that someone was on a plane. Walter Briggs arrived at 7:15 in the morning. He came with his director of human resources, a woman named Carol Whitman, who had been with the company for 8 years and had the manner of someone who combines genuine warmth with the precise attentiveness of someone who knows that details matter and keeps them all organized in her head. And he came with his employment compliance attorney, a man named Paul Greer, who was quiet and methodical and carried a tablet that contained, as Keanu understood it, the full results of the scheduling audit. They did not call ahead to Brett or Phil. They arrived before the store opened. Walter had the override code for the employee entrance. They went in through the back. Keanu met them in the employee break room. It was a small room. 6 chairs around a table. A coffee machine that had been cleaned recently by someone who cared about it. A bulletin board with the employee schedule posted. Keanu looked at the schedule while he waited for the others to settle in. He found Diane's name. 22 hours this week. 3 shifts. None of them consecutive. Scheduled in a pattern that would make it very difficult to pick up supplemental work anywhere else because the gaps between shifts were large enough to block other commitments without being large enough to constitute meaningful additional income. He recognized that pattern. It was deliberate. It was the schedule of someone who wanted Diane to feel the loss of her hours without being able to remedy it. Walter asked Keanu to sit in on the conversations. The first was with Phil Carson. Phil came into the break room with the expression of a man who had spent 14 months trying not to be in exactly this situation. He was 53. He had managed Location 9 for 7 years. He had been, by Walter's account, a reliable and thoughtful manager for the first 6 of those years. He sat down across from Walter. He looked at Keanu once, did not appear to recognize him. Looked back at Walter. "Phil," Walter said, "I'm going to be straightforward with you. I'm here because we've identified a significant pattern of scheduling modifications at this location that raise serious compliance concerns. I want to hear from you directly in Brett Harmon's management of staff over the past 14 months. Phil was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I approved everything he sent me." "I know," Walter said. "That's part of what concerns me. I want to understand why." Phil looked at the table. "Brett's numbers were good," he said. "The revenue line was strong. The margin was coming in clean. When his schedule modifications came through, the business case looked sound. Labor optimization. 11 employees, Carol said, quietly. Average reduction of 14 hours per week. 7 of the 11 had accommodation requests filed in the 90 days prior." Phil's jaw moved. "I didn't put those 2 things together," he said. "Didn't?" Walter said. "Or preferred not to?" The silence that followed that question was answer enough. Phil looked up. His expression had changed. Something in it that was not quite guilt and not quite relief, but lived in the complicated space between them. The expression of a man who has been waiting for someone to name something he has known for a while. "He's difficult," Phil said finally. "Brett. When I push back on anything, he escalates. He has a relationship with someone at the regional level. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know if calling would make things worse for the people on my floor." He stopped. "I know that's not a good enough reason." "It's not," Walter said, "but it tells me something I needed to know." He stood. "Stay here, please. We'll come back to you." Brett Harmon came in at 8:53. He came through the front entrance. Another statement, in its way. He walked past the registers, past the service counter, toward the back where his office was. He got most of the way there. "Brett," Walter's voice. From the end of the main aisle. Brett turned. He saw Walter. He saw Carol and Paul. He saw the tablet. He saw Keanu standing slightly to the side, and he did not recognize Keanu, which was fine, because Keanu was not there to be recognized. "I'm Walter Briggs," Walter said. "I founded this company. I'd like to speak with you." Brett straightened. He was not, Keanu noticed, a man who startled easily. He had the composure of someone who had dealt with uncomfortable situations by turning them into confrontations, and had won enough of those confrontations to trust the strategy. "Of course," Brett said. "My office is—" "We'll use the break room," Walter said. They walked in. Walter closed the door. Carol opened the tablet. She placed it on the table facing Brett. The scheduling audit. 11 names. 14 months of reductions. The 7 accommodation requests filed in the 90 days prior to each reduction. Brett's own internal notes. Brief phrases that were worse than clinical. Phrases that described Diane Calloway as a reliability concern. That described Angela as insufficiently committed to operational requirements. That described Raymond's medically documented shoulder injury as inconsistent with the demands of his role. Brett looked at the tablet. He did not look at Walter. He looked at the numbers, at the names, at his own notations in the internal system, the brief phrases in his own handwriting that were now being read back to him, and with 3 people who understood exactly what those phrases meant. "These were business decisions," he said. "Labor optimization. The margin targets." The margin targets, Walter said, were met by systematically cutting the hours of employees who had the most tenure, the most institutional knowledge, and the most legitimate need for schedule accommodation. He paused. "That is not optimization. That is retaliation dressed up as management." "I had performance concerns about." "The performance concerns," Carol said, "were filed after the accommodation requests. In every case. The requests came first. The performance concerns followed." She tapped the tablet. "In 7 out of 7 instances, the performance notation appeared within 30 days of the accommodation request being denied. That is a legally significant pattern, Brett, and I want you to understand clearly that this full audit has been reviewed by our employment attorney." Brett looked at Paul. Paul met his eyes, said nothing. The silence of someone who has seen this before and knows where it ends. Brett looked at the table. The composure was still there, but it was visibly working harder than it had been when he walked in. The specific effort of a man who has been accustomed to being in control of the rooms he enters, now sitting in a room he cannot control. "I was delivering results," he said. "The store's numbers are strong. 8% revenue growth. Labor costs significantly below. The labor costs are below target." Walter said, "Because you replace the hours of your most experienced employees with cheaper hours from newer hires who are not yet expensive enough to matter to your spreadsheet." His voice was even, not loud, never loud, but entirely without the warmth that he chose to withhold from this particular room. "I came back from a health situation to find that my name was on a store where people were afraid to use sick days, where a 6-year employee was running her household on 22 hours a week because she asked for a schedule adjustment to care for her mother after a stroke, and you decided that made her a reliability concern, where a manager was using the scheduling tool as a systematic punishment mechanism against the people most likely to have a legitimate human reason to need anything." Brett started to speak. Walter raised one hand, open, steady. "Enough. Your employment with this company is terminated. Effective today," Walter said. "Carol will walk you through the process." He stood. "The regional contact through whom you filed your store reports has also been placed on administrative review, pending a determination of what they knew and when they knew it." Brett's jaw set. "You're making a mistake," he said. His voice had gone flat. The flatness of a man who has decided that dignity is the only available move. Those people expect exceptions. They expect the job to work around their personal situations. That is not how a business runs. Those people, Keanu said. It was the first time he had spoken since the meeting began. Everyone in the room turned. Brett looked at him, looked at the jacket and the jeans and the boots. Still did not recognize him. Still could not place him, did not particularly care. He looked like someone who had come in alongside the lawyers, which in a sense was true. Those people, Keanu said again. The same two words, quitter, the second time. A woman has been at this store for 6 years. She knows every regular customer by name. She trained the people who train the new hires. She runs the best lane in this location. She asked for a shift adjustment because her mother had a stroke and needed morning care, and you filed her as a reliability concern and cut her to 22 hours. He paused. A man hurt his shoulder. He had a doctor's note. He asked for modified duties, which is a legal right, and you filed it as a performance issue, so you will be afraid to take sick days. Another pause. A woman has been working toward a business degree for 4 years. She asked for Saturdays. You cut her weekend hours. For 4 years of work toward something she was doing on her own time, with her own money, while working for you. Brett said nothing. These are not people who don't want to work, Keanu said. These are people who work hard and have lives and came to their employer with reasonable human requests and were punished for it, systematically, over 14 months. He looked at Brett. That is not running a business. That is using the control you have over people's income to make them afraid. And fear is not a management strategy. It is a cruelty. The room was very quiet. Brett had nothing left that he was willing to say. He stood. He walked out with Carol. Walter sat with Keanu in the break room for a few minutes after. Diane, Keanu said. I know, Walter said. She's been here 6 years. She knows this store. She cares about it genuinely. The way you care about something you helped build. I saw her file last night, Walter said. She's been rated exceptional in every annual review until Brett arrived. Customer satisfaction scores for her lane are consistently above benchmark for the whole chain. He paused. I want to offer her the interim floor manager role while we restructure the supervisory position. She'll say she doesn't have experience, Keanu said. She'll say she's not sure she can do it. Walter almost smiled. Then we'll tell her she's been doing it for 6 years already. Just without the title. And Phil? Phil stays for now, with conditions and a formal improvement plan. What he did or didn't do was motivated by fear, not personal gain. That's fixable, barely, but fixable. He looked at Keanu. Keanu, I wouldn't have known any of this without you. You would have figured it out. Maybe. Later. By which time more people would have left or stopped believing it was worth coming back. Walter looked at the bulletin board, at the schedule with Diane's name and her 22 hours. I want to see her. Will you be there? Yes, Keanu said. Walter asked Jesse to bring Diane to the break room. She came in with the expression of someone who has been called to the office and is managing all the knowledge that being called to the office rarely means something good. She stopped when she saw Walter. She recognized him. Her expression shifted through several configurations, in quick succession. Mrs. Calloway, Walter said. I'm Walter Briggs. Please sit down. She sat. I came here this morning, Walter said, because I received information that something was wrong at this location. I've spent the morning confirming that the information was accurate. I want to tell you directly. What happened to your schedule after you filed an accommodation request for your mother's care was wrong. It was retaliatory. It was contrary to this company's policies and values. And I am sorry it happened under my name. Diane sat very still. The stillness of someone receiving something they had not expected to receive and are not yet sure what to do with. Your hours will be restored to 38 guaranteed as of next week. Walter continued. You'll also receive back pay for the difference between what you were scheduled and what you should have been scheduled, going back to when the reductions began. Diane's eyes were full. She held it together. I also want to offer you the position of interim floor manager for location 9, Walter said, pending a fuller restructuring of the supervisory role here, with a commensurate salary adjustment. She looked at him. I don't, she started. You've been managing this floor, Keanu said. She looked at him. She had not been formally introduced to him and seemed uncertain whether she should recognize him, and uncertain whether it mattered. You've been managing this floor for 6 years, Keanu continued. Every regular customer knows your name. Your lane satisfaction scores are above benchmark for the whole chain. You trained Jesse. You know this store's systems better than anyone in it. He paused. The title would just be making official what you've already been doing. Diane looked at her hands. Some days I barely make it through the shift, she said. Her voice was steady but honest. The honesty of someone who has decided in this particular moment that pretending takes more energy than she has available. I don't know if I have what it takes to actually manage people. The person who manages people well, Walter said, is usually the one who shows up every day even when it's hard, not because someone is watching, but because they care about the people around them and the work they do. He let that settle. That's you. I saw it in your file before I even walked through this door this morning. Diane looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, okay, just that word. Soft and real, and meaning a great many things that were not about a title. Okay, Walter said back. Let's get to work. The all-staff meeting happened at 9:45. Walter stood at the front of the break room, which had never been this full. Every available shift that could be reasonably adjusted had been. Employees stood along the walls. Some sat on the counter. Jesse was near the back. Angela was near the door. Raymond stood with his arms crossed, his weight shifted slightly off his injured shoulder. Walter spoke for 8 minutes. He didn't use notes. He told them who he was, and he had come. He told them, clearly and without softening it, what the compliance review had found. He told them that Brett Harmon's employment had been terminated. He told them that Phil Carson would remain with conditions and accountability. He told them that the regional contact who had been overseeing this location was under review. He told them that Diane Calloway would serve as interim floor manager effective immediately. A sound moved through the room. Not applause exactly. Something more complicated than applause. The collective release of people who have been braced against something for a long time and are only now being told they can stop bracing. He told them that all scheduling modifications made under Brett's management would be reviewed for compliance, that any employee whose hours had been reduced following an accommodation request would have their situation individually addressed by Carol within the week. He told them that the anonymous reporting line which had existed on paper for years and had apparently not functioned in practice at this location, would be connected directly to his office. Not the regional director, his. He told them that if anyone in the room had documentation, notes, or recollections to share with the compliance team, Carol would be available for the rest of the day, and conversations would be entirely private. He told them that what had happened here was not their fault. He told them that what had happened here had happened in part because he had been too far removed from his own stores, and that was going to change. Then he stopped talking and looked at the room. "I want to hear from you," he said. "Not right now, over time. I want this company to be the kind of place where what happened here can't go on for 14 months without someone being able to stop it. And the only way I can build that is by actually listening to the people who work here." He nodded. That was everything. Raymond uncrossed his arms. Angela's face did something private and complicated that resolved into something steadier. Jesse was looking at the floor, but he was standing differently. Keanu left before the day shift ended. He said goodbye to Walter in the hallway near the employee entrance. Walter shook his hand with both of his. "Thank you," Walter said. "Diane was already doing the work," Keanu said. "You just needed to see it. Someone needed to walk in and look first." Keanu pulled his jacket on. "How are you?" he said. He meant it in the broader sense. Walter understood. Walter was quiet for a moment. "Angry at myself," he said, "for pulling back too far, for trusting the numbers over the people. I built this company on the idea that if you treat your people right, everything else follows. And then I got sick and I trusted a structure that turned out not to be trustworthy, and it cost 11 people 14 months of hours they needed." He paused. "That's on me." "You came when you found out," Keanu said. "Later than I should have." "Yes," Keanu said simply, "but you came." He walked out. Brett Harmon filed a wrongful termination complaint 3 weeks after leaving Location 9. The complaint alleged that his dismissal was motivated by personal bias and not supported by documented performance concerns. The employment compliance team responded with the full scheduling audit, all 14 months, all 11 employees, all 7 accommodation requests filed prior to our reductions. Brett's own internal notes, written in his own system at his own login, describing the employees he had cut as reliability concerns and performance risks. The complaint was withdrawn within 10 days. His attorney advised the withdrawal. Brett sat in his attorney's office the afternoon the recommendation was made and looked at the printout of his own internal notes, his own words. The brief, clinical phrases he had written into the system as cover for decisions he had made for other reasons. Unreliable. Not priority for scheduling. Performance inconsistent with role demands. He had written those things about Diane, about a woman who had been at that store for 6 years and had been rated exceptional in every annual review until he arrived. He had written them after she asked for a schedule adjustment to care for her mother. He sat with that for a while. Not with guilt, exactly. He was not yet at guilt. He was at something more preliminary. The specific discomfort of looking at evidence of your own behavior when the evidence is in your own handwriting, and there is nowhere useful to point except at yourself. He had told himself for 14 months that he was running a tight operation, that he was making hard decisions that other managers were too soft to make, that the people who needed accommodations were the people who were least committed to the work. That commitment meant availability, that if you had a sick parent, or a doctor's appointment, or a college class on Saturday mornings, that was a personal problem, and the job was the job. He had believed this. He had constructed an entire internal framework that made what he was doing look, from inside that framework, like strong management. The framework was wrong. He understood that now, sitting in his attorney's office with his own words printed on the paper in front of him. Not because someone had told him it's wrong. Because seeing it spelled out plainly, in handwriting, attached to his own lock-in, timesed against the Huclea Apakshane requests he had denied, made the framework collapse into what it actually was. Not strong management, just power directed at people who had less of it. He withdrew the complaint. He drove home. He did not tell anyone what he had thought about in the attorney's office. He did not tell anyone what it had felt like to read his own words about Diane Calloway and understand for the first time without the framework to protect him from understanding it, what those words had meant for her life. He kept that to himself. Some reckonings are private. The regional contact who had been overseeing Location 9, a man named Frank Sewell, who had been with the company's regional structure for 4 years, was found during the subsequent investigation to have received 3 separate management concerns and to have filed practices and to have filed none of them. He had not responded to 2 of the complainants. He had told a third that the concerns were staffing related and outside his scope of review. Frank Sewell's employment was also terminated. Both Brett and Frank had developed, during their overlapping tenure, a working relationship that the investigation characterized as mutually beneficial. Brett's strong margin numbers made Frank's regional performance look good. Frank's willingness to shield Brett from scrutiny gave Brett the operational freedom he needed to continue his methods. It was not a formal arrangement. It did not need to be. It was simply 2 people who had found, without discussion, that they were useful to each other. And that usefulness had cost 11 people 14 months of hours they needed. 2 of those 11 had left the company entirely during that period. Both were contacted by Carol personally. Both received back pay for what the audit confirmed they had lost. One of them, a woman who had worked at Location 9 for 4 years before leaving, sent a handwritten letter back to Carol. She said she had filed an internal concern 6 months before she resigned. She had never received a response. She had assumed the filing had gone nowhere and that the answer was to leave. She said she had spent the year since leaving wondering whether the problem had been as bad as she remembered or whether she had made it bigger in her own head by being too sensitive. She said receiving the letter from Carol was the first time she had felt that someone from the company had actually seen what happened to her. She said that mattered more than the check. She said, "I just needed to know. I wasn't imagining it." Carol forwarded the letter to Walter without comment. Walter read it twice. Then he made a note in his calendar to personally review the anonymous reporting response rates for all 19 locations on a quarterly basis. Not delegated, not summarized, not filtered through the regional structure. Personally, because some things need to stay close to the person who built the company. Some signals are too important to pass through too many layers before reaching someone with enough authority and enough genuine keter to act on them. A complaint about a slow checkout lane can be handled by a regional director. An employee writing that they filed a concern and never heard back is something else entirely. It is the sound of someone who needed the system to work and found that it didn't. Who concluded from that finding that the correct response was to leave quietly rather than push further into a structure that had already told them, in the most practical terms available, that it was not listening. Walter kept the letter. He kept it in a folder in his desk drawer. He looked at it sometimes on mornings when the operational pressures of running a 19-location chain made the less visible priorities feel abstract. The letter made them concrete again. Diane Calloway took the interim floor manager role with the specific, practical seriousness of someone who has been preparing for something without knowing it. Her first act was to post a single sheet of paper on the break room bulletin board, not a policy document. Not a mission statement, just a list. It read, "Your accommodation requests will be answered within 48 hours. If you have a medical note, it will be treated as a medical note. If you have a family emergency, call me directly. Not a form, me. If something is wrong here, come tell me. If I'm the problem, go to Walter. That chain exists. Use it. You are not a replaceable part. You are specific. This store works because of the specific people in it." And at the bottom, in smaller handwriting, "If you see something that isn't right, say something. I promise someone is listening now." Jesse read the list the morning it went up. He read it twice. Then he went to the produce section and straightened a sale sign that had come loose from its clip. Not because anyone was watching, because the store was his store too. Angela came in that Saturday for her first full weekend shift in months. She had a business exam the following Monday. She had studied Thursday and Friday and was ready. She worked her shift. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. At the end of her shift, Diane stopped her near the service counter. "How did the studying go?" Diane asked. Angela looked at her. "How did you know I was studying?" "Jess told me you've been working on your business degree for 4 years, Diane said. "I just wanted to make sure you had enough space to finish it." Angela was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nobody here has ever asked me that before." Diane nodded. "Well," she said, "somebody is now." Raymond came back to full duties the week after, following his medical clearance. His shoulder had healed well. He had needed 6 weeks of modified duties and careful management, and had received during that time exactly the medical accommodation he had been entitled to for the entire previous 6 weeks, but had been too afraid to take. There is a specific kind of relief that comes from finally doing the thing you were allowed to do all along, but were afraid to do. It doesn't feel exactly like relief. It feels more like the release of something you have been carrying tensed for a long time. Like setting down a weight you had stopped noticing because you had been holding it for so long it had become part of your posture. Raymond had that look on his face the week he was on modified duties. The look of someone who had been given permission to heal and was surprised to find the permission was real. On his first day back at full capacity, he came in 2 hours early. He restocked the entire back half of the store before anyone else arrived. Not because anyone asked, because 8 years of working in that store had given him a knowledge of its rhythms, what needed to be in what position before the morning rush, where the gaps would appear by mid-afternoon if the morning stock wasn't managed carefully. That was not written anywhere, but lived in his hands and his feet. and the particular way his eyes moved across a shelf. Diane found him at 7 in the morning, finishing the last aisle. She stood at the end of it for a moment and watched him work. Then she said, "You didn't have to come in early," he said. "I know." She nodded. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged in the way certain people shrug when receiving thanks they don't know how to hold, not deflecting. Just not sure what to do with the fact that someone noticed. "It's my store," he said, which was, Diane thought, exactly the right answer. Not her store, not Walter's store, not a store that belonged to whoever had the authority to modify schedules, his store. The store of a man who had worked there for 8 years and knew it better than anyone, with a supervisor title, and who had spent 6 weeks afraid to use his legitimate sick days, and who had shown up early on his first full day back because the stores needed restocking, and he was the person who knew how. That was what loyalty actually looked like, Diane thought. Not compliance. Not fear-shaped obedience. This, a person who cares about a place because the place has earned their care, showing up before anyone asked because the work matters to them personally. She filed that observation away. It would inform every scheduling decision she made going forward. 1 month later, Walter returned to Location 9. He came through the front doors at midday on a Wednesday. No announcement, no team. Just a man in a pale blue shirt, carrying a basket. He walked the main aisle slowly. The produce section was full, organized. Every bin properly stocked. A sale sign hanging straight in its clip. He moved toward the registers. At Register 4, a new employee was being trained by Diane, showing him the return process with the patient specificity of someone who has explained it many times and has not gotten impatient about explaining it again. She said something to him that made him nod, and then, a second later, smile slightly. The smile of someone who had understood something and felt good about understanding it. She looked up and saw Walter. She finished the explanation, said something brief to the new employee, then walked over. "You didn't call ahead," she said. "I didn't want anything to change because I was coming," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Is anything different?" He looked around the store. Jesse was helping a customer in the houseware section, body language open and easy, the specific ease of someone who has found their footing. Angela was at the service counter, laughing at something a regular customer had said, not performing a laugh, a real one, the kind that comes from being genuinely present in a conversation. Raymond was moving through the back of the store with the unhurried competence of someone who has been there for 8 years and knows where every item lives. "No," Walter said. "Nothing is different." Diane nodded. She looked at her store for a moment. "Some days are still hard," she said. "People are people. Things go wrong. We run short of something at the worst possible moment. A customer is upset, and I have to figure out how to fix it and still keep everyone moving. I make calls I'm not sure about, and sometimes I get them wrong." She paused. "But nobody is crying alone in the break room." "I check every shift." Walter looked at her. "You check," he said. "Every shift," she said. "It takes 30 seconds to walk through the break room and read the room. Know who needs a minute. It takes almost nothing to ask someone, 'How are you doing?' and actually wait for the real answer instead of the one they think you want to hear." She looked at him. "Brett never did that. I don't know if he thought it wasn't his job or if he simply didn't care. But I know what it costs when nobody does it." "What does it cost?" he said. Diane was quiet for a moment. Not because she didn't know, because she wanted to say it accurately. Everything, she said. Not all at once. Peace, peace. What? Reshived, nobody asks. Every week where the hours drop and nobody explains why. Every time you do something right and nobody sees it and you start to wonder if the work matters at all. If you matter. She paused. When you're carrying something hard and the place where you spend most of your time treats you like a unit of labor rather than a person, you spend all your remaining energy just holding yourself together, and you have nothing left for the actual work. And then they say, your performance is declining. And the declining performance is used as evidence that the treatment was justified. She looked at him steadily. I know how that loop works from the inside, so I check, because check costs almost nothing, and it changes everything. Walter stood in the main aisle of his grocery store in southeast Denver and looked at the woman in front of him. He had built this company with his own hands 30 years ago. He had written a mission statement on a piece of paper and taped it to the back office wall of a strip mall location. Our people first, then our customers, then our numbers. And then he had gotten sick and pulled back and trusted a structure, and the structure had produced Brett Harmon. Had produced 14 months of people being afraid to use sick days, had produced a 6-year employee running her household on 22 hours a week. And it had also, he now understood, produced Diane Calloway, who had survived all of that with her competence and her care and her instinct for the floor fully intact, who had not let what was being done to her make her into someone who did it to others, who checked the break room every shift, not because anyone told her to, because she knew what it cost when nobody did. Thank you, Walter said. She nodded. She went back to her floor. He did his shopping, like a customer in a store that was, finally and genuinely, exactly what it had always been supposed to be. 3 months after Brett Harmon walked out of Location 9 for the last time, Keanu was on location in New Mexico when a brief message arrived from Walter. Diane Calloway appointed permanent store manager, Location 9. Best appointment I have made in years. Employee satisfaction scores highest in chain. Customer satisfaction up 14% since March. Jessie is training as department lead. Angela passed her business degree final examinations. She already told Diane she wants to move into operations management eventually. Raymond was recognized at the all-staff meeting for 8 years of service. He said, and I am quoting him directly, "It is my store. I thought you should hear that." Keanu read the message twice. He typed back, that was already true before anyone acknowledged it. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. He thought about a Tuesday afternoon in Denver, a sliding door opening, a basket from the stacks near the entrance, the produce section and its slightly understocked bins, and a sales sign hanging at an angle that he had straightened without thinking about it, the way you straight some that is crooked, and it takes 4 seconds. Straightening it takes 4 seconds. He thought about a woman at Register 4 who was trying not to cry and was doing an extraordinary job of it considering what she was carrying. About the specific, practiced quality of that smile. The smile of someone who has decided that the people in front of her deserve her best, regardless of what is happening to her. He thought about Jessie in the produce section, carefully choosing whether each sentence was worth the risk of saying. About Angela reseating her study schedule semester after semester around a shift manager who was using her accommodation request as an excuse to cut her hours. About Raymond working through shoulder pain because he was afraid of what would get written in his file if he used a sick day. He thought about 8 words. You already lost 8 hours last month. You might want to think about how important those remaining hours are to you. He thought about what it means to have power over someone's income, and to use that power not to help them do better work, but to make them afraid. To make fear the tool of management. To mistake compliance for competence and obedience for loyalty. He thought about his mother. About the morning she came home from shifts at a job that paid what it paid and asked what it asked, and she would sit at the kitchen table for a few minutes before she could do anything else. Not resting, resetting, locating the part of herself that the shift had not been able to reach, checking that it was still there. He had watched her do that. He had been young enough to not fully understand it and old enough to know it mattered. He understood it now. He put his phone in his jacket pocket. He was due on set in 10 minutes. He walked out into the New Mexico afternoon, the braided cord on his left wrist catching the light, and he thought about what it means to show up. Not because the system rewards it, not because anyone is watching, not because you will be recognized for it, or promoted for it, or thanked for it on any particular day, but because the work matters and the people around you matter, and those two things together are reason enough. He thought about that for a moment. He thought about a sale sign hanging at an angle in a Denver grocery store, and a woman at register 4 who checked that everyone on her floor was okay at the start of every shift because she knew what it cost when nobody did. Then he went to work. Leadership is not the authority to make decisions. Anyone can have authority. Leadership is about what you choose to see. It is about whether you walk onto a floor and look at a report or look at the people. It is about whether the person trying not to cry at register 4 is visible to you as a performance problem or as a human being who is carrying something. It is about whether you use the tools available to you, schedules, evaluations, access to hours, as instruments of punishment or instruments of trust. Bret Harmon had authority. He used it as a weapon. He built a system, deliberately and over time, that rewarded silence and compliance and punished the entirely human act of needing something. He did it efficiently. He did it behind language that sounded like management, reliability concerns, operational requirements, labor optimization, and he did it in a structure where the numbers he produced made the structure itself reluctant to look closely at how he was producing them. He was caught because one person sent an anonymous email, and because the person who received that email did not dismiss it as a complaint from a difficult employee, and because that person called someone he trusted to go and look. And because that someone walked through a sliding door on a Tuesday afternoon and straightened a Excel sign and bought a bag of apples and watched and listened and then made a phone call. That is how it unraveled. Not through a compliance system, though the compliance system did its job when it was finally activated. Not through an anonymous reporting line, though that line existed and someone had tried to use it. Through a person who came in and looked at what was actually there, and a woman who had been holding the whole floor together for 6 years, and had been doing it at reduced hours for 14 months because she had asked for a human accommodation and been punished for it. and had kept showing up, kept doing the full job, kept caring about her customers and her colleagues and the store itself. Not because the system rewarded it, because she was who she was. And she was, it turned out, exactly the person the store needed to lead it. A man in a worn leather jacket walked into a grocery store in Denver on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. He straightened a sales sign that was hanging at an angle. He bought some apples. He watched. He listened. He made a phone call to someone who could do what he could not. And 11 people got their hours back. And a woman who had been managing an entire store on 22 hours a week got the title that matched the work she had been doing for 6 years. And a young man who had been watching carefully from the produce section for 3 years got the chance to become something more. And a woman in her late 20s is finishing her business degree with her Saturdays protected. And a man who hurt his shoulder is back at full duties without fear. And the break room bulletin board has a list on it. And the last line of the list says, "I promise someone is listening now." That is not a grand story. It is a quiet one. The best ones always are. Because the best things that happen in organizations, the real changes, the ones that last, are almost never dramatic. They are a 30-second walk through the break room at the start of every shift. They are a sales sign straightened by someone who noticed it was crooked. They are a phone call made at 11 at night by someone who could not let something alone because he knew it mattered. They are a woman at a register trying not to cry, who kept showing up anyway, and who, when someone finally asked the right question at the right moment, had an answer ready. Because she had never stopped believing the answer was worth keeping. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.